This is Michelle Hughes from Ageless and Timeless. Today's podcast is brought to you by Water and Wellness. Recently, I had the opportunity to visit Water and Wellness at their offices, and I can tell you that as far as you and I are concerned and our health is concerned, this is one of the most important places that you can go to find water that is purified and products that will help your longevity and your overall health. Visit waterandwellness.com to learn how you can take control of your drinking water and learn about those natural additives to optimize your health and longevity. Contact Stacy at 877-296-6880. Use the Ageless code and you'll get a 20% discount on all your products.
'Cause you're amazing, just the way you are.
Welcome to Ageless and Timeless. This is Michelle Hughes, returning again with another very special guest today, a man who I have known of and respected for many, many years, probably because we come from the same background of real estate development, and also because he is a very much a value-driven leader, and I've listened to his TED Talks, and many of his other accomplishments have been part of my growth as a real estate developer because I look to him for inspiration. His name is Chip Conley. We both come from San Francisco, and he's joining us today from San Francisco today, right, Chip?
That's right.
Yay, because he's been traveling. It was in, I think you said 4 countries or?
Yeah, I just got back from the UK, from London, and then I was in Las Vegas for a speech. And prior to that, I was in Mexico. So because we have our academy there. So
Right, I know. And actually, do you remember that you and I both have property in the exact same area?
oh, that's right, exactly.
Right.
Yes. And
Mine is in Cerritos, and yours I know is right in Todos
Pescadero.
Santos.
Yeah.
But are you right next to the new hotel, the boutique hotel?
No, we're in Pescadero, so we're
Oh,
actually so we're closer to you.
oh, hey, great. I didn't know that. Well, maybe we'll meet down there one day.
Yes.
But I saw that you have 3 acres there, and that's where you're doing your Elder Academy.
That's the modern Elder Academy is right there on the beach, and we've actually now it's up to 4 acres, which is we didn't change the website and say that.
Okay, well, good
But
for
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Good for you. Well,
yeah.
we both know how beautiful that area is, and it actually has a strong spiritual calling, don't you think?
Yes, for sure.
So, and that's why I like Todos Santos versus Cabo.
Yeah, for sure.
And that I think, but I heard that you're studying Spanish. So, hola, señor.
Yes, mi español es muy malo.
That's, you know what? That's exactly what I say all the time.
Yeah,
I always
pero
say,
I,
un
you know,
poquito. Yo
yeah,
hablo
pero tengo
español
una
un
casa,
poquito.
so if I'm living there part time, so I'm going to San Miguel de Allende next month to
Oh,
go do
yay.
a Spanish immersion, and then I have a Spanish teacher in the Todos Santos area who I see.
Well, San Miguel de Allende is one of the more spiritual towns of Mexico, don't you think?
Yes,
And it has a
absolutely.
lot of gringos.
It's a beautiful place. It does have a lot of gringos, and it's a really interesting place to be for Day of the Dead, which is why when I was there last, it was
Well,
just
guess what,
yeah.
Chip? That's my birthday.
Oh, you're
Yeah,
kidding!
Dia de
Wow,
los Muertos, November 1st. When I
wow. I'm October 31st.
Oh, are you serious? Oh my
Yes,
gosh, we're Scorpio twins. That doesn't surprise me, Chip.
yes. We're passionate.
Really, we're both very passionate, and that's the best thing I think about the Scorpio sign, if you believe it all in, is that we have so much intensity and passion for what we do, and that certainly defines you. I know that, and I think very much defines me. But well, I wanted to jump in with just a little history about you. So, Joie de Vie, Joy of Life. How did you decide on that name, and does it relate to who you are as a person, the Joy of Life?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so on a good day for sure. I was 25 years old. I was a real estate developer in San Francisco. I'd gotten my real estate license at age 19 and was selling commercial real estate in Silicon Valley while I was in college at Stanford. And I worked for a real estate developer out of business school. And About 2 years into working for the developer, I had this fantasy about the fact that it felt like boutique hotels were just getting off the ground in the US. And I felt like I wanted to be a real estate developer focusing on something that made people happy. And so joie de vivre was a expression I had learned in high school French, which is part of the reason I'm learning Spanish now, because that French was my language in high school. But I decided that if we're in the business of creating joy for people, why not name the company that? Because there are very few companies whose mission statement is also the name of the company. And joie de vivre means joy of life, and that's really what we tried to create first for our employees and then for our customers.
I think that's wonderful. And you sold to Giolo, right? To the Pritzker.
Sold to the Pritzkers, and then they sold joie de vivre to Hyatt, which the
Right.
Pritzkers obviously have a
Of
Hyatt
course.
connection. And a few years later, so now joie de vivre is part of Hyatt, but it's a lot smaller than it used to be. So when I was the founder and CEO for 24 years, we had 52 boutique hotels. And so it was all in California. We were pretty much by far the largest independent hotelier in California.
When you sell a company, Chip, like you did, and then you see other people take it over, and you see the people that you've nurtured are now part of a different entity. How do you feel? If you, let's say, if you went back to say hello to people, how do you feel when that happens?
Well, gosh, it's a hard one. My sister worked for me for 20 years, and I sold the company after 24 years. So she started with me very early. So she stayed on, as did a lot of the people, most of the people who I brought into the company. And I had hoped that the new owners, John Pritzker and Giolo, were going to be as committed to joie de vivre as they said they were. And on some level they were, but then they did a merger with another hotel company, and it wasn't merger didn't go so well. And ultimately it affected the culture, it affected a lot of people's jobs. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that John had good intentions, but the culture took a hit, and then they lost a few hotels, frankly, to because it's a management company and a brand. And so I will say that John was an honorable guy in doing the transaction. It was sort of at the bottom of the Great Recession that I just said, you know what, I don't want to be doing this anymore. And it was hard to make that decision, but at the end of the day, I've come to realize that sometimes if you do not create space in your life for something else to emerge, that other thing won't emerge. And of course, if I hadn't created the space, the Airbnb founders would have never, knocked, sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we got this little tech startup. We want you to join us."
And I think that's one of the most compelling parts of your very exciting journey in life is that when one door closes, five more open. And so let's segue to Airbnb. We all
Yeah.
know the history, but you were there at the very beginning, and you were mentoring Brian Chesky as the CEO. What advice did you provide to them at that very early stage when they were first developing their concept?
Well, yeah, and let me start by saying I wasn't there at the very start. I was there. I mean, the company was 1/20th the size it is today, so it was 5% the size it is today. So it was very small, but it was still. They had a couple hundred employees, 250 employees when I joined. So it was of some substance, and it was growing quickly. But it was almost exclusively a tech company. I don't think anybody ever thought of Airbnb as anything but a tech company. And the question was, how are they going to build a brand and build a relationship in such a ways that they could actually create a loyal set of hosts and guests around the world, and create a strategy that made sense. So, long story short is, I think the number one thing I said to Brian is we can learn from Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs said somewhat famously that what he said no to was more important than what he said yes to. And what does that mean? It means that if you're going to be a really good really strong focused company and create a brand, you better have an editing function of what it is that you're not going to do. because Airbnb was a darling of the sharing economy, as was Uber back then. And there are all kinds of people coming to us with sharing economy business plans that they wanted us to sort of get involved in, create a marketplace for conference space or create a marketplace for X, Y, or Z. And I just sort of said to Brian, and in my leadership position as the head of global hospitality and strategy for the company, and Brian's in-house mentor, I sort of pulled rank a couple times where I just said, listen, we just have to say no to those things. And so we ultimately, about 4 months after I joined, we did an offsite retreat in New York. Our senior leadership team of 12, we all went to New York, spent 3 days there. I led a retreat where we actually said, what are our strategic initiatives for next year? And we had 23 choices, and we just pared it down to 4. And we focused on those 4. And I will say that that was 2013 and 2014, and then 15 and 16. Those were some of our best years in terms of how focused we were. And with that focus came really effective execution. And those were some exceptional years where we were doubling every year. We double and we say, we can't double again because we now have a bigger number. Well, we doubled again. Oh, can we do it again? Yes, we doubled again. And that was a really fun time. So for 4 years, I was in that role. And then for the last 2.5 years, I've been a strategic advisor. So I've been part-time.
You know, you said something. I was reading the Warren Buffett, and that's actually one of his major teachings is learning to say no. And I think as an entrepreneur, that is one of the most difficult challenges because there are always temptations, new businesses, new opportunities, like you just described, and to be able to distill down to the mission statement and stay focused, I think is one of the biggest challenges of being an entrepreneur CEO. What do you think?
I think, yeah, there's no doubt about that. I also think it's an interesting element, throwing a little bit of age in here for a minute, that the first half of our lives, I believe, is about accumulating. And the second half of our life is about editing. I think this is true in a lot of different ways. And, the first half of your life, you're adding things. You're always learning something new. You have new identities and roles and responsibilities and stuff that you buy and new family members. And at some point around age 45 to 50, people actually sort of hit a wall and say, oh, I can't accumulate anymore. And they're almost suffocating under all of these responsibilities, all of these identities and all the stuff. And I think that process of moving from the first half of your life to the second half of your life is a process that is really helpful because that editing function you do in your own life can be very valuable in the context of business. One of the things that was very true here, and I think true of many young tech companies, is if they get off to a good start, a really great start in the case of Airbnb, there's a little bit of a sense of you have the Midas touch. Whatever you touch is going to turn to gold. And there's also a curiosity and interest in trying new things. And so I get all of that. And yet, what we've seen so often is companies actually don't have the Midas touch when they do things that are outside of what they do exceptionally well. And if you get a little bit unfocused in what you're doing, your core business could actually be at risk. So, yeah, it's very important.
Well, you said something very important here, and it reminds me of an interchange I had with somebody recently, exchange, I had with somebody recently, where we talked about who has influenced who we are today. How have we become the person that we are, and who have been our role models and who have been our mentors. And I know that you're mentoring others right now, but you certainly have grown up as they say, a rebel entrepreneur. Who were your mentors? Who did you get the best advice from?
I have a funny story here. About 2 or 3 years after I started Joie de Vivre, so I was 26 when I started it, so close to my 30th birthday, I realized I needed a mentor. And I asked myself, who in the world would I most want advice from? And Richard Branson was one of them, and that I want. But I did meet him a couple times, and he wrote the foreword for my first book. But he wasn't really my mentor. The person who actually became my mentor was this guy who was named Herb Kelleher. He was the founding CEO of Southwest Airlines, and he actually was CEO for 37 years. I called his office in Dallas and ended up getting through to his executive assistant, Colleen Barrett. And Colleen and I struck up a conversation, and she could tell that I was a young whippersnapper who had some interesting ideas, and I wanted to learn from Herb because Herb had created a beautiful culture, an amazing culture at Southwest Airlines, and culture was really important to me in my boutique hotel company. So what Colleen said, and ultimately there's a side story on Colleen I'll tell in a minute. She said, "Listen, Herb can't do a phone call with you, but if you write Herb once a year, he will respond to your letter." And again, this is in the era of letters. He'll respond to your letter once a year, and you can ask him a bunch of questions. I never met Herb Kelleher. I never had a phone conversation with him, but once a year I would write him a letter, and he would write me back. And so that's a beautiful story. The other part about Colleen Barrett is Colleen was his secretary, his executive assistant. Colleen ended up becoming the president of Southwest Airlines.
Oh.
Because he had such confidence in her.
Oh, I love
and
that.
and he believed so much in her ability to create culture that ultimately his secretary became the president of the most successful airline in the United States.
Well, so I'm curious to know, what questions did you ask him in those letters, and what did he give you advice back that has
Oh yeah.
influenced your development as an executive?
One of the things that I think came out of those conversations, a lot of them were about culture and about leadership and about what happens when a company actually is growing so fast that it outpaces the development path of its leaders. So you hire great people, but the company is growing faster than the leaders can scale themselves and their talents. So what do you do about that? That's a classic. And that he would talk with me about, well, it depends on. And it's sort of hard because it was in a letter format, so these were long letters. So I try to give case studies and have him respond to the case study. So, for example, I had a person who was a real loyalist. So everybody loved the person, but they were starting to actually falter in their job. I didn't want them to leave the company, but I needed somebody to come in and be their boss and frankly run that department, and they were running it now. And the question was, how could I do that in a way that didn't demotivate or humiliate that person? So I got some feedback about that. I got some feedback on something that ultimately became something called the joie de vivre heart, which is the idea we put it in the shape of a heart. If you create a great culture, it leads to enthusiastic employees, and then that leads to loyal customers, market share growth, and then more profitability, and then you invest back in the culture. It's a virtuous circle. I turned it into a heart, but the premise of that virtuous circle came from Herb Kelleher when he was talking to me about in essence, the strategy behind their culture. They believed that the culture was a great strategy for them, and because it actually created much happier employees, and the customers could feel that.
Well, that's very interesting, because when I decided to call this podcast Ageless and Timeless, I created a logo with a friend of mine who's a very good photographer, but also great with concepts and value-driven concepts. And anyway, we came up with the circle. So when you see,
Beautiful.
when my website is going to go, I think it's going to go live this week, you'll see Ageless and Timeless is written around a circle, and in the middle is looks like a K, but it's actually Chinese calligraphy for eternal life. So
Oh, beautiful.
here again, you and I have so much synchronicity, Chip, because I want to segue for a moment to your Modern Elder Academy, but also in between your best-selling book called Wisdom at Work. And why don't you spend a moment and just tell us a little bit about what drove you to write that book?
Sure. The experience I had at Airbnb here, I'm actually here in the offices right now. The experience I had was really interesting. I didn't have any role models for what it meant to come into a company, be twice the age of the average employee, to be mentoring the CEO while he is also my boss, and he's 21 years younger than me. And what does it mean to be a modern elder as opposed to a traditional elder? So let's talk about the word elder for a minute. So this is not elderly.
Right.
Elderly is the last 5 or 10 years of your life. That's a
Right.
different era.
Right.
You can be an elder at age 40 if you're surrounded by 20-year-olds. I think that elder is a relative term.
Right.
And so they started calling me the elder at Airbnb in the company. And ultimately Joe Gebbia, one of the co-founders, said, no, you're really the modern elder. And the difference was the traditional elder was the one who just dispensed wisdom. The modern elder was as curious as they are wise. And because I joined Airbnb as someone who at age 52 had no tech experience, often I was the dumbest person in the room, and I was the person learning the most. Now that was awkward. I will tell you that, I ultimately, this is part of the reason that I wrote the book, because I wanted to help other people with this issue. I felt awkward because I felt like I'm the oldest person in the room. I should be the smartest, or I should have the most knowledge, but of course, in certain areas, I didn't. So I had to own my innocence, own my naivete, and I ended up, starting to realize that the thing that makes a modern elder valuable is that they've built some wisdom over time, but they actually need to understand and be curious enough about an environment so that they could actually understand the context for where that wisdom can go. So curiosity opens up possibilities, and wisdom distills down what's important. And that combination in one person who can do both of those things is very valuable. So I ended up writing the book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And I did that because I saw a growing number of people my age in their 50s, and sometimes even younger or older, but I saw them feeling increasingly irrelevant and sometimes full of anxiety because they know they're going to live longer, but power is moving younger in a digital society. And so that has actually created an irrelevancy gap for people in midlife who feel like when you're going to live 10 years longer and but power is moving 10 years younger, you have 20 years of additional irrelevancy. And that led me to the book. And the process of researching the book was fascinating, interviewing over 150 people. And I realized, God, we got to work on this, because with powers going to the young people, because of our increasing reliance on digital, that's fine. But, we expect these young digital leaders to miraculously embody the relationship wisdoms, the leadership skills, the strategic thinking that we've had decades to learn. And I want to figure out, how do we create a mutual mentorship relationship so that older people and younger people can actually work together.
I think that is just so marvelous that you've done that, because what I'm hearing today from quote older people, which is really our age group, but we're not really older, because that's why Ageless and Timeless is such a relevant title, because we're full of life, and we're full of curiosity, we're full of we don't age in the traditional sense when we have that kind of life force. But in talking with some of the management people who have millennials, what I hear is that there's such a gap in the sense of integration between those two groups, those cohorts, let's say. And what you're doing is actually bringing a way for more integration, which is going to help a lot of companies. People, I'm sure, are reading this book in corporate America. And it really is important to find in any negotiation, for example, we both know from real estate is to find the commonality, find what we have in common with each other, and then dwell on building from there. And it sounds like that's what you did with this book.
Yeah, it's interesting. For the first time ever, we have 5 generations in the workplace, and with 5 generations, historically, the way it all worked, and you and I both know this, is like power rested with the older people, because companies didn't change all that much, and and you just learned what you learned over time, and there was sort of a hierarchy that everybody worked within. Well, for decades now, that's been going away, and it's really accelerated in the last 20 years since the dot-com boom. There's just been a sense like all these companies, whether it's Google or Facebook or Airbnb, are being started by people in their 20s or even younger. And what that means is the power dynamic has changed. But the thing that's interesting is that each of these generations generally has some talents that they can bring to the table. And so it's almost like an intergenerational feast or potluck we could have, where people bring what they do best to the table. And that's why I call this mutual mentorship. My relationship with Brian, I was his mentor. I still am his mentor. But 6.5 years into it, I got to say, I learn as much from him as he does from me.
Right. And that's what's so beautiful about this is that it truly is synchronicity of people and finding the best, as we say in our vision statement, the best version of ourselves. So if you're finding the best that you can offer, the knowledge, the wisdom, the experience, all of that, and then build on that together, find those commonalities. That is truly the foundation of great companies. And I think about all these companies that could have gone south, like Google, Apple,
Hmm.
starting in a garage on an envelope. But one of our guests, said that he's an entrepreneurial executive who turned into an executive coach, and he said, many of those companies could have failed had it
Hmm.
not been for the vision and the strength of the leadership, and also what you said earlier about the focus, staying focused, and then about building people. So Chip, do you think leaders are born or made?
I don't think it's neither or. I think it's a both and I think that the both the that I think it's more the latter than the former. I don't think people are necessarily born into leadership. I think there are personality traits that come from our DNA and from our family, and that may influence a lot of things. But at the end of the day, there's no one type of leader that I think is the best kind of leader. You can be an introvert and still be a great leader. And generally we think of leaders often as, extroverted. So I think it is something that you build over time, though.
Mm.
The reason leaders, I think, do can get better over time is you develop pattern recognition. Pattern recognition means that you actually see patterns in business or in people in such a way that you can actually sort of predict the future,
Mm.
and your intuition gets it. And I think that's the part that's really interesting about wisdom. Wisdom is really taking all of the experience and knowledge that you have and distilling it down to something that says, this is the truth. And it's not just my opinion. I say wisdom is what happens when your opinions have left the room.
Mm.
So it's not about your opinions. It's actually about, frankly, the distillation of knowledge and instinct and experience in a way that you can actually almost predict the future a little bit. And
Mm-hmm.
it is very interesting that the best futurists or the most famous futurists in the world, almost all of them are 50 and older, which is interesting because they're not going to necessarily live into the future that they're actually imagining.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that futurists are great at being able to, again, use that pattern recognition.
So, in your experience, what was your greatest moment? What was the moment that you look at and you say, "There I was at the top of my game. This is my greatest accomplishment." What would you say that has been?
Well, I don't know. I'll tell you a moment where it was literally a moment, or a little bit more than a moment. So it's less about a specific accomplishment as much as it was a sense of a sense of, I am being all I can be right now.
Mm.
So it was my almost my last day at Airbnb full time in my full time role for 4 years. And we had something called One Airbnb, and One Airbnb was all of the employees around the world of Airbnb from 21 offices coming to San Francisco for 4 days and doing a 4 day conference. It almost felt like a family reunion. Really creative, really interesting 4 days together. And ironically, my last day in this role as head of global hospitality strategy and Brian's in-house mentor, in my full-time role, my last day was the last night of the One Airbnb. So we
Mm.
had 3,000 employees here in San Francisco, and we had a final dinner in a place called the Armory, and it was like decked out, huge room with, this is the end of the conference, so everybody's sort of like really excited and having fun and drinking. And so Brian basically said to me, I want you to give a commencement address because you're graduating. You're
Mm.
going to be giving the commencement address, but you're the one who's graduating from us, Chip. And basically, I want you to get up there and for 15 or 20 minutes, give us your wisdom to all of these young people in the company because you've had over 100 mentees in this company. and you're really loved. You are truly loved in this company. And so I got up there and I had a script, and I went off script, and I just basically spoke from my heart. In fact, I started with a Khalil Gibran quote from the book The Prophet, which is "Work is love made visible." And truly, I hadn't planned that. It just popped out of my mouth. Again, that's that intuition. It's like, okay, I think this is what I'm supposed to say. And they gave me a standing ovation before I got on stage. They gave me a standing ovation after I was on stage. And for the next hour, I just saw people with tears in their eyes coming up. And why does that feel like maybe my greatest moment? And actually, it's how I finished the book. So, I'm sorry about the spoiler alert. That's in chapter 10, the end of the book. That's what I end with. I think it was a sense of accomplishment because I had maybe graduated into the place where I was not, yes, I have ego attached to the fact that was a beautiful experience for me and to feel that. But one of the things that had happened for me in my Airbnb experience was I had moved out of being, the sage on the stage who got all the attention because for 24 years I was a founder and CEO of a company, to being the guide on the side. And I was the one who was helping support these three founders, but also so many people in the company. So my legacy was helping these young people get better at what they do. And so to actually feel like 3,000 people in a room, it was silent as can be. They're all which is weird at 9 o'clock, after everybody's been drinking, but everybody was listening. And so I guess there's a sense for me that at the end of the day, I felt like, wow, I have shifted into this new role. And this new role is more about being interested in other people than being interesting, and more about the primary operating system of my life is no longer my ego, it's more my soul. And, it's not about it's no longer about the can-do-it attitude. I'm very much of a can-do-it. We can do it. The little engine that could, that little children's book. Well, I moved from the can-do-it to a conduit. A conduit basically means things flow through me. And whether that's wisdom or through emotional intelligence, helping people feel good about themselves. But more than anything, I feel like my role, with the mentees I have and here at Airbnb is to be a conduit to help people get better at what they do.
Well, I must say I have a few tears in my eyes right now.
Uh-huh.
Jim, you really touched me, and I'm sure you're touching our viewers as well. So you probably read the book Conversations with God. Donald Walsh, I think his name is. He was the one that had a very bad accident and then was homeless and basically picked himself up and became a world famous speaker and wrote many books. But the one Conversations with God, he said one of the first things we have to do is put ourselves aside. It's not about us. It's about the lives that we touch. And this is what you just said. It's, you became a conduit, a channel for other people to have their moment in the sun, let's say, and to experience their life fulfillment through your wisdom. I mean, it wasn't only you, but you are a contributor, and that's the conduit part. So
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And no wonder you wrote this book. It's
Yeah.
like a culmination of
Yeah.
who you are. Well, of course, life isn't all about a bowl of cherries. So let's talk for a moment about the adversities. So in your life, what obstacles were the most formidable, and how did you conquer them?
Most of my career has been as a hotelier, and I still do own 9 hotels. I sold the management company and brand, but I still own some real estate. The hotel business is very much a cyclical business, and in peak times it does really well, and in bad times it does really badly. And so between 2001 and 2008, 2009, I went through 2 once-in-a-lifetime downturns in the same decade, the dot-com bust and 9/11, which really affected the Bay Area, and then the Great Recession. So I would say the first one, I felt like a gladiator. I felt totally inspired to lead in a difficult time. And it ultimately led me to using Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs and applying it to an organization. And I ended up writing a book, Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo, from Maslow, based upon that experience. But for the Great Recession, the adversity really hit me in the face. And I didn't want to be CEO of any of the other company anymore. I didn't really want to be, I had 3,500 employees at that point. I just didn't really want to be in a position of having to have my life so dominated by this role of being CEO. And so I was less of a gladiator. I was more of a prisoner of this prison I'd created for myself. And so I really had to do a lot of deep work emotionally to sort of say, how am I going to get through this? Because the Great Recession was really punishing on so many levels. We all remember that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a long time ago now, but it was awful. And I had to keep my emotions strong enough to know that the higher you are in an organization, leadership wise, the more contagious your emotions. And I had to do that at the same time I knew that I was trying to figure out how to find someone to buy the company. And I thought I was going to be running this company the rest of my life. But it was, so I'd say the adversity was, having friends there and then having journaling every Friday afternoon. What was my wisdom of the week? What did I learn? So it was a lot of that. It was having faith that on the other side of this, it was going to get better, and it did. So I think that's, it's really important to know adversity is absolutely part of life. It's part of work, part of being an entrepreneur for sure. So that's been another thing I think I've tried to teach younger entrepreneurs, especially the ones who are successful quickly, is get really clear about what you've learned here and how are you going to apply it during the difficult times.
It's a Chinese word for crisis.
Opportunity.
Yeah, that's not an accident, right? They're
I
very.
guess.
So the those years are years that we all still have arrows in our backs, and for me, I believe in miracles. That I could have gotten through that period with the kind of challenges that we all face, particularly in our business and real estate development.
Yes.
So I applaud you. What books do you read? What are your favorite leadership and inspirational books?
I love Man's Search for Meaning, which is Viktor Frankl's book about being in a concentration camp. It's people ask me, what's your favorite leadership book? And I tell them that, and they said, that's not a leadership book. And I said, well, yes, it is actually on many levels. It is a leadership book because leading your own emotions and helping to, in the worst of times in a concentration camp in World War II, helping to lead other people's emotions when there's very little hope. Is you can learn a lot from that. So that's a book I love. There's a book by Danny Meyer. Danny Meyer is a well-known restaurateur from New York called Setting the Table.
Yep. And
it's really about how do you infuse hospitality leadership in any company. So I love that book. I love reading books, so I'm always reading something new. There's a book that relates to the Modern Elder Academy, which we just created, called The 100-Year Life, that inspired me a little bit in the process of creating the academy.
What was the name of that book?
It's called The 100-Year Life.
Oh, The 100-Year Life. Oh, I like that. That would be good for Ageless and Timeless.
Yes.
Oh, wow. I have to read that. Who's the author?
It's Andrew Scott and Linda Gratton.
Is it basically about ageless?
It's about the idea that, frankly, people being born today are there's a 50% chance that they're going to live till over 100.
Right.
So what does the world look like if the average person is going to live to 100? What does that do for the workplace? What does it do for consumers? What does it do for? And so it's a thoughtful sort of lifestyle meets economist kind of book that is really helpful to sort of think through your own imagination of, if you work till age 85 or 90, what would you do? So it helped me to sort of say, I think everybody needs their own longevity strategy.
So, since you said that, what is yours?
Mine is this is yeah, this is a good segue into the Modern Elder Academy. I love the idea that I will be teaching for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so where will I do that? Well, I came up with this idea of like, okay, we don't have midlife wisdom schools. We have, adolescents when they're going, preparing for adulthood. You have junior high school and high school and college counselors and all kinds of things. We have, during puberty, you have bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, and quinceañeras and communion ceremonies. We really give a lot of attention to people during that puberty adolescence era.
Right.
There's a new word that's called middlescence. And middlescence is in essence saying in the middle of your life, you also have hormonal changes, physical changes, emotional changes, and your identity changes in some ways. And we have done very little to help people through middlescence. And so the Modern Elder Academy is the world's first midlife wisdom school. And the premise behind it is that people in midlife, in a world that's changing as quickly as it is, need to get better and better at imagining how to mine their mastery, what they're good at, and then figure out how to repurpose it in new ways out there in the world. And so we opened in 2018. We've had 500 alums now from 17 countries. And so my longevity strategy is to live on a 3 or 4 acres on the beach in Mexico, an hour north of Cabo San Lucas, where I can teach. And I can, I live a 10-minute walk up the beach, and I can walk down the beach and give my talk at 85 and then go back down to my home nearby. So I like that.
How would our viewers be able to access membership or participation in the Modern Elder Academy if they so desired?
It's actually right there, website, modernelderacademy.com or .org, either one. It's a social enterprise, so we give scholarships to a lot of people who actually come as well.
Is it a 501c3?
It's actually not, because it's based in Mexico. It was really hard to do that. So it's a social enterprise. It has zero, so I don't pay myself. I don't pay rent to myself. And so because of that, it allows us to, and since we're not trying to make a profit, it allows us to go ahead and, give scholarships to people, to a lot of people. And there's 1-week programs. And so you'll see on the website a series of between late October and mid-July every year, a series of workshops that and we are at the 99th percentile in terms of guest satisfaction in the hospitality and education categories. So clearly we're on to something.
And people are coming from all over the world, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there's some real international, global interchange going on, as well as the teaching of the the content, because people are sharing their cultures as well. That's exciting. So it's 1 week, and they spend that time in the location in Mexico.
It's like a luxury, like they're saying, like in a luxury boutique hotel on the beach. For a week, 3 meals a day, gourmet, healthy meals, a free massage during the week, lots and lots of activities, and obviously lots of education.
Well, so just go on that website then, if somebody wanted to participate.
Yes.
Okay. So Chip, I had a question. I was reading an article about accountability, and do you think that we can teach accountability, or have you done so in your experience?
I think, accountability, there's 2 parts to it. One is the conscience piece of it, and that's a little harder to teach. I mean, I think you can teach it, frankly, in youth. I'm not sure how easy it is to teach it later in life.
Right.
But it's possible. But then there's the other side of accountability, which is less the conscience side. It's more like clarity side. They're like, okay, who's responsible for what? And that just takes good organization. So you can sort of get clear, like, okay, who's accountable? Who's like primarily accountable, secondarily accountable, who has influence, who has some decision-making rights here. So that's just frankly,
I think this was at Amazon, and it was Jeff Bezos has a protocol where before any meeting, everybody has to read the notes that people have to prepare before they come into that meeting. And
Yep.
so everybody is prepared. There's no
Yep.
extemporaneous. And basically, the accountability is that you accept responsibility for what you have written is your
Yeah.
goals, your intentions, your vision, and it's all black and white. I think it's a
Mhm.
brilliant idea and a way to basically, if you're going to teach people to be
Yep.
responsible for what they're charged with,
Yep.
then here it is, and you're making a public statement
Yep. Yep.
to all
Agreed. Agreed.
your associates.
Yep.
So in my life, I have thought about accountability because of it's so easy for people to point the finger outward, and I always say if you point one finger out, three more are pointing right back at you,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
So
Exactly.
take responsibility for your actions, and don't be so easy to blame. Don't make it so easy to blame others, which is very often it's a human
Yep.
condition, don't you think?
Yep. Yep.
So I was reading a quote, and I want your advice on this. It says,
Actually, Michelle, one quick thing. I do have to go in a
"Oh,
moment.
okay,
Unfortunately.
yeah, I'm waiting for Tony, our CEO, to come back in, and he's going to end us. I think it's just about like 3 minutes. Do we have 3 minutes for you?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just ask you because this is it's burning in my consciousness. It says, when we are unable to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. When you know the why for living, you can endure almost any how. Can you just take the last 3 minutes we have and just comment on how that affects you personally?
Yeah, that's a quote from Nietzsche,
That's right.
if I'm not mistaken,
You're
and
right. You're absolutely right. I should have said that.
very much relates to what Frankl talks about as well. I think there's I wrote a book called Emotional Equations, and the equation that defined me when I was going through a very difficult time 11 years ago was despair equals suffering minus meaning. And suffering is can be a constant in life. If you're a Buddhist, you actually believe it's the first noble truth of Buddhism is that suffering is always there. You can always find it. But despair and meaning are inversely proportional. So if you increase the meaning, you decrease the despair. And so I think that's really what that quote is saying is that when in doubt, when going through a difficult time, the best thing you can do is to figure out, how am I learning something here? How do I have a sense that at the other side of this, life is going to be better? How do I still have hope? How do I still have a sense of meaning that, yes, I've just lost my arm in a shark attack, but I'm going to go back out and teach people that you can actually recover from that.
Okay.
So, and go out and surf again. So, there's elements that, character over circumstances is something I've said quite often, in my life. And, character is something you build often in the difficult times.
Yeah, they say do not let circumstance define you.
Yeah.
If you do, then you've basically been disempowered. It
Yes.
is about positive mental attitude and your belief that what you can what you do you will achieve what you believe. Well, I know you have to leave us. I'm so sorry. The time went by so fast.
Yes.
Did
Well,
it go by
thank you,
fast for
Michelle.
you, Chip?
Yes.
Well, you share
thank
your
you. I'm so
wisdom,
sorry that I have to go, but I wish you all the best. And
Thank you.
I think it's great what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Chip. You have a wonderful day.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, we've been treated today to one of I would call him a modern elder, certainly a guru in the business world today. And the proof of that is how much he is in demand in terms of speaking engagements throughout the world. And of course, also his accomplishments with Airbnb, which have been quite significant, as we all know. So I've been very thrilled to have a fellow San Franciscan, Chip Conley, here with us today. And I unfortunately had to rush to another meeting, which is his typical schedule. But we have learned a lot, and we will continue to learn. If you
'Cause you're amazing. Just